Could you buy salvation in 1517? In 1517, a German peasant pays a few coins for a papal certificate, a document said to reduce his mother's time in purgatory. For him, it represents hope. For the Church, it is an indulgence. For Martin Luther, it becomes the beginning of a division that will permanently reshape Christianity. In this video, we will examine the biblical verses behind the debate, how indulgences became financially explosive, and why Catholics and Protestants continue to disagree 5 centuries later. To understand the controversy, we must begin with a foundational question. What exactly is purgatory? Before the financial tensions and institutional conflict, there was theology. In Catholic teaching, purgatory is not hell, nor is it a second chance. It is defined as a state of purification. The logic is straightforward. If God is perfectly holy, nothing imperfect can enter His presence. From this reasoning, 3 possibilities emerge. Heaven for those already completely purified, hell for those who definitively reject God, and purgatory for those who die in grace, yet still require purification. It is not eternal damnation, but rather a final cleansing. At first glance, the concept appears internally coherent. Yet an inevitable question immediately follows. Where does this idea appear in the Bible? Catholics and Protestants read the same scriptures, but reach radically different conclusions. Understanding why requires examining the arguments on both sides. Catholic theology traditionally rests on several key foundations. One of the most frequently cited passages is 1 Corinthians 3:15, which states, "He will be saved, but only as through fire." The argument proceeds logically. If the individual is saved, the text cannot describe hell. Yet if fire is involved, it does not resemble a simple depiction of heaven. From this interpretation, an intermediate state of purification is inferred. Another important reference is 2 Maccabees 12:46, a passage describing prayers offered for the dead, so they may be freed from sin. This raises a striking theological question. Why pray for the dead if their destiny is already irreversible? In addition to biblical interpretation, Catholic thought also appeals to historical continuity, noting that various early Christian writers refer to purification after death. From this perspective, purgatory is not considered a late invention, but a doctrine that develops gradually over centuries. Up to this point, the framework appears theologically structured and historically grounded. However, the Protestant reformers strongly challenged these conclusions. 16th century reformers responded with forceful objections. First, 2 Maccabees is not part of the Protestant canon and is therefore not recognized as inspired scripture. Without canonical authority, it cannot serve as doctrinal proof. Second, 1 Corinthians 3 is interpreted differently. Rather than describing souls being purified, the passage is understood as referring to works being tested. In this reading, the fire evaluates ministries, not individuals. A central text supporting the Protestant position is Hebrews 9:27, which declares, "Man is destined to die once, and after that, to face judgment." No intermediate stages are explicitly mentioned. This interpretation is reinforced by Luke 23:43, where Jesus tells the repentant criminal, "Son, today you will be with me in paradise." The emphasis is immediate rather than transitional. From this perspective, purgatory appears not only unnecessary, but potentially incompatible with Christ's completed work. Yet the disagreement extends beyond interpretation alone. Beneath the theological debate lies a deeper conflict: authority. Who ultimately defines doctrine? The Church and its tradition, or Scripture interpreted on its own terms? This tension would soon move from academic discussion into public controversy. In the early 16th century, Rome faced immense financial demands, most visibly the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica. Within Catholic doctrine, indulgences did not forgive sins themselves. They were defined as the remission of temporal penalties associated with sins already absolved. However, theological nuance rarely survives mass communication. In pastoral practice, the message was often simplified, sometimes dramatically. Johann Tetzel became the most famous figure associated with indulgence preaching, linked to the phrase, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." Regardless of debates about the precise wording, the impact on popular perception was unmistakable. For ordinary believers, the implication was clear. Post-mortem suffering could be reduced through financial contributions, and the emotional force of this idea was immense. If a loved one's purification could be shortened, many were willing to pay. Across German territories, thousands contributed savings, and some even sold possessions. Religion, guilt, and money became tightly intertwined, creating conditions for explosive conflict. It is within this environment that Martin Luther emerges. Contrary to later portrayals, Luther did not initially deny purgatory. His earliest criticisms focused on the preaching and commercialization of indulgences. In Thesis 27, he writes, "They preach human doctrine, who say that when the coin clinks, the soul flies." The challenge was theological, but also institutional. If the Pope possessed vast spiritual authority, why should grace appear connected to economic transactions? The printing press transformed what began as an academic dispute into a continental phenomenon. The controversy escalated rapidly, culminating in Luther's excommunication in 1521. What started as a dispute over indulgences soon expanded into broader challenges involving papal authority, tradition, the sacraments, and the nature of salvation itself. Purgatory may have been the spark, but authority became the fire. The consequences were profound. The Reformation permanently altered Europe's religious landscape, intensifying political and religious conflicts for generations. The Catholic Church responded through the Council of Trent, where the doctrine of purgatory was reaffirmed. Abuses were condemned, and improper indulgence practices were prohibited. Doctrine remained, while problematic practices were restricted. 5 centuries later, divisions persist. Catholicism continues to affirm purification after death. The majority of Protestant traditions reject it, and Eastern Orthodoxy employs different theological frameworks. The disagreement endures because the deeper question endures. How is doctrinal truth defined? Through historical continuity, biblical interpretation, or institutional authority? The 16th century controversy was therefore not simply a debate about purgatory, fire, or money. It represented a clash between competing models of religious authority. Once indulgences were questioned, purgatory was questioned, and once purgatory was questioned, the issue became who holds the final word in matters of faith. 5 centuries later, that question remains open, and its consequences continue to shape global Christianity. If you had to defend a position using only the Bible, which view would you find more persuasive? Share your perspective in the comments, and if you believe a crucial argument from either side is missing, add it to the discussion. This is Across Beliefs, where religion meets facts.